Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. The high-quality outdoor gear and clothing company Patagonia has long been known for more than its products. It's widely recognized for its commitment to the environment and conservation. Its focus on reduced waste culture stems from the man behind the brand, Yvon Chouinard. How did a self-proclaimed existential dirtbag and self-taught blacksmith become the founder of the billion-dollar brand Patagonia? And why did it bother him to have so much wealth? Joining me now to answer that question and discuss the life of Yvon Chouinard is best-selling author David Gelles. His new book, Dirtbag Billionaire, How Yvon Chouinard Built Patagonia, Made a Fortune, and Gave It All Away, is on bookshelves now. Thanks for joining me, David.
Thanks for having me.
We could easily center our conversation on what's included on the very first page of your book, some of the startling events of Yvon Chouinard's life. But let's explore his life in three parts: the adventurer, the businessman, and the philanthropist. How did he come to embrace the sort of nomadic dirtbag lifestyle?
Well, from the very moment he was sort of born into this world, he had this sense of wanderlust and a real passion for the outdoors. When I spoke with people who knew him as a child, they remember him wandering into the woods behind his home in Maine. And then when I talked to people who knew him as a young man, they recalled stories of him going into the wilderness in Southern California to catch wild falcons. And so this sense of just being drawn to some of the most remote and extreme places on earth has animated him from the very time he was a boy to even his time today. I was just in touch with the family a few days ago, and at 86 years old, he just got back from a 1-month-long backpacking trip in Labrador in the far reaches of Canada. So he hasn't stopped yet.
How did that magnetic connection to nature turn him in to the adventurer that you described?
Well, here you have to sort of home in on this period when he's a late teens, early 20s man. It's the 1950s, not early 1960s in California, and the sport of rock climbing is really starting to become popular. And Chenard and some of his friends take to it and really start pushing the limits. And as they try these bigger and bigger feats, scaling ever larger mountains, they discover that the gear that they have, that they were importing from Europe, was simply failing them. It wasn't good enough for these more extreme climbs that they were trying to do. And so Chenard, not having graduated from college, not knowing what he's going to do with his life, buys a used anvil from a junkyard and starts fashioning his own climbing equipment. What he soon discovers is that A, he's got a knack for blacksmithing and a real keen eye for design, but more importantly, his gear's better than anything he can buy. And so he starts selling it to his fellow climbers, to other rock climbers, and that begins his life as a businessman. He does that for a decade or so, mostly focusing on climbing gear, and then ultimately starts the clothing company that becomes known as Patagonia. And so you see this real direct connection from his passions as a climber, as an outdoorsman, to the businessman he ultimately becomes.
How did his commitment to simplicity and self-reliance fuel some of his ventures?
This is one of the most interesting things I discovered about Chenard. And I've known him for more than a decade now. And when I first spoke with him, I remember my very first conversation with him. It actually wasn't about the outdoors. It wasn't about clothing. It was about Zen Buddhism. The first time we wound up talking, we were talking about the simplicity in Zen Buddhism and how he tried to take that philosophy and apply it to his product design. Now, he's not a Buddhist, but he understood in this ancient Japanese philosophy that there was some innate truth that in making the best products to him, it meant taking things away rather than adding features to a product. In Chenard's mind, the perfect product is one that can fulfill its mission with the absolute barest requirements necessary rather than one that's like overloaded with all the latest technological features. And so that sort of love of simplicity has informed his product design and his construction from the very outset of his business days more than 50 years ago. And he would like to believe it still animates the company and its product decisions today.
He built an iconic brand in Patagonia. What were his particular ingredients for business success?
Here, I think it's important to not impart too much sort of intentionality to what is really a messy and complicated story. So, this is not a man who set out with like a rule book of how to do business. He figured this stuff out on the fly. A lot of it was frankly messy. This book is not just a story about how they got it right. There are a lot of missteps along the way. And I think it's just, I really try to emphasize that this is not like a neat and tidy story. Many business books try to communicate that here's like your 5 success principles, and here, if you follow them, you'll get it right. Like, this is not that, right? This is a messy, complicated story. I say, this is not a self help manual. This is like a Zen koan, right? With a big, unstructured question that ultimately has a sort of uh, unsatisfying, uh, ineffable answer.
As a businessman, how did Chouinard balance his radical anti-corporate ideology with the demands of running a global brand?
Yeah, so he, as you note, never held businessmen in high regard. He called them grease balls, grease bags. He never identified one. And when it finally became sort of undeniable that he was a CEO and a founder, it inspired a whole lot of self-loathing in the man. He was never comfortable with it. And in fact, when you talk about him balancing it, the way he would balance it would be by leaving, right? He would go out, even when he was running this company, on months long expeditions into the mountains where he had no contact with his team. And what he would call that is his MBA, right? Not a master's of business administration that you might get at the Harvard School of Business. No, to Chouinard, an MBA is what he called management by absence. He just took off.
So he had this avant-garde leadership style. How did that shape the culture and the conscience of Patagonia and its staff?
Yeah, here it's so remarkable. As I, investigated 50 years of this company, one of the things that came through so clearly was that those values and ethics, which I mentioned, were consistent. And the commitment to taking care of his people at the company, especially women, that began at the very outset of the time he was an employer, and it continues to this day. And here I think it's important to note that while Chouinard is on the cover of this book and his name is on the cover of this book, his wife, Melinda Chouinard, played an extraordinary role, almost always behind the scenes, in shaping that culture. And so I think it's just critical to recognize that he didn't do all this alone. And that in fact, many of the most pivotal CEOs and leaders at this company over the years were women. When it comes to his commitment to the natural world, you can already understand that that comes right out of his personal love for nature. But then again, very early, more than 50 years ago now, he began using some of the profits he was making from Patagonia to start supporting environmental causes. This again began in the smallest of ways when he helped stop an effort to dam the Ventura River, this little creek that runs just behind the office. But he did that because he didn't want them mucking up the river and messing up his local surf break. Fast forward to today, 50 years later, literally hundreds of millions of dollars of profits generated by Patagonia are being used to support large-scale conservation efforts around the globe. We see large-scale, multi-hundred-million-dollar conservation projects, but it's the same ethos, the same ethics showing up.
I want to stick with that. Despite amassing staggering wealth, he's ill at ease with being labeled a billionaire. What specifically led to his decision to renounce his wealth to give Patagonia away to, quote, save the planet?
He, as you note, was never comfortable with personal wealth. And I've spent a lot of time with him and the family, including at their home. And I can attest, they do not live like billionaires. He cooks off the same cast iron skillet he bought 50 years ago. He picked me up from the airport in a 1999 Toyota hatchback. So these are not extremely luxurious people. But it was a moment in 2017 or 18 when, for the first time, Forbes magazine put Chenard on their list of annual billionaires that really set him off. When he saw his name on a list of billionaires, he went apoplectic. He called it one of the worst days of his life. And he started demanding to his inner circle that they remedy the situation, that they get him off this list of billionaires. And, nothing sort of happened for several years. But then when COVID hit, I think many people, for all sorts of reasons, sort of had existential reflection moments. And he said, we have to fix this. And so he went to his inner circle, his board, his CEO, and he said, if you don't figure out a way to get me off this list, I will start calling billionaires and offer to sell the company. And they sort of knew he was serious. And so thus began a roughly year to 18-month process by which the inner circle of Patagonia, as well as a couple external advisors, devised what ultimately was this extraordinary innovation where they were able to have the Chenard family renounce their ownership of the company while still allowing the company to mostly remain as it was, and while also finding a way to distribute the vast majority of the profits it creates to the causes that Chenard and his family care most about.
David, on this show, we've previously discussed topics like libertarianism, which challenges whether there should be billionaires in the first place. Chenard's legacy is a rare one. You've closely examined his life. In a world of billionaires who seem to want to become trillionaires, is he an anomaly? What do you think his impact has been on capitalism?
I, I think about this a lot. And my previous book was about Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, who many people would argue is the most influential CEO of the last 100 years, perhaps. And it's easy to then look at Chenard's life and believe that, well, he was just playing on a smaller stage. But in the course of my reporting, I discovered that Chenard and Patagonia have really profoundly impacted corporate America, even if he managed to stay below the radar. This is a company that has been responsible for the founding of innumerable business groups that are all trying to sort of make corporate America a more responsible place. And so while it may not be as obvious to see, right? He didn't turn Patagonia into the world's most valuable company as Jack did with GE. If you look closely, I really believe, and I document in the book, that you can see Patagonia's fingerprints all over our economy today.
And finally, David, what can Chenard's journey teach us about living a life aligned with one's values?
You just said it, Dana. If you want to do it, it's possible. Now, no one can replicate his extraordinarily adventurous life. This is a man that's scaled mountains and has been to some of the most wild and remote places on Earth. And no company, of course, can be exactly like Patagonia. But I think in the story of both the man and the corporation, you can see that exactly what you said, living a life and running a company aligned with your values is possible. And it's not always easy, and it's not without its hiccups and its challenges. And you might make missteps along the way, and it might mean sacrificing some measure of conventional success. But these stories really show that more than anything, it's possible. And I think in a world today where it's easy to get jaded and sort of disillusioned by the business world, that alone serves as a really powerful testament to what's possible.
David Gellis's book, Dirtbag Billionaire: How Yvon Chenard Built Patagonia, Made a Fortune, and Gave It All Away, is out now. Thanks for being on The Excerpt, David.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.